probably don't give him enough credit because he's so tiny, but Ant-Man is probably one of the best characters in the entire Marvel universe. In this video, we're going to basically go over who is Ant-Man from a comic standpoint, but also from a Marvel Cinematic Universe standpoint. Ant-Man was created by Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, and Larry Lieber, or Larry Lieber. I hope I'm saying that right. Sorry, Larry. His first appearance was in Tales to Astonish number 35 in 1962. So the original Ant-Man, Hank Pym, was a brilliant scientist who basically founded a particle which was aptly named after himself, the Pym particle, which allowed him to shrink himself down to the size of an ant while maintaining human strength. Knowing this, he used his ability to fight crime and injustice as Ant-Man. Later in the comics, Pym would go on to create other personas such as Giant Man and a villainous identity that he had for some time known as Yellow Jacket. However, during his time still being Ant-Man, he did join the superhero team, the Avengers. Now, because Ant-Man's powers and abilities are pretty much the same between the comics and the MCU, let's talk about them first. So obviously we know that Ant-Man's biggest power is that he's able to shrink down to the size of an ant while maintaining human strength. He also has the ability to communicate with ants, and he also has the ability to grow into a larger size, again later known as the other persona of Giant Man. Ant-Man is also skilled in hand-to-hand combat and is also able to fly because of his suit's thrusters. Even though Ant-Man's powers and abilities are great, they do have their limitations. As he continues to shrink down smaller and smaller in size, it becomes increasingly more difficult for him to maintain his human strength as well as his intelligence. And if he gets too small, he may actually lose unconsciousness. And on the opposite side, as he gets bigger and grows into Giant Man, as he gets bigger and bigger, he actually loses control of his limbs and his body, which makes him harder to control as he's moving around. So with that being said, let's just transition over to Ant-Man in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And in the MCU, Ant-Man is actually played by Scott Lang, who was played by the loving Paul Rudd. In the movie, Scott is nothing like Hank Pym. In fact, Scott is a high-level thief who basically decides to turn his life around after spending some time in prison. In the first movie, we see Scott struggling to connect with his daughter Cassie because he did spend so much time away from her in prison. In that first movie, Scott Lang is approached by Hank Pym, who is the designer and creator of Ant-Man, and asks Scott to use his heist and thief level abilities for good by being the Ant-Man himself. As far as I'm concerned, Ant-Man is probably the most important Avenger in the MCU, as he is the one who came up with the entire idea of how to save everyone and the timeline from Thanos' decimation. Because he's the one who came up with the time heist, Tony Stark was just the guy who was smart enough to put it all together and say exactly what needed to be done. However, if you actually watch the movie, Ant-Man, Scott Lang, is the one who actually came up with the idea. At this point, hopefully you have a better and a new appreciation of Ant-Man. If you want to watch more videos related to Ant-Man, go ahead and check this video out.